Peak Wealth Management proudly presents Finding True Wealth with Nick Hopwood, where we believe by providing education and guidance, we help our clients make sound financial decisions, which ultimately puts them on a path towards their definition of true wealth. Now, here is your certified financial planner professional and founder of Peak Wealth Management, Nick Hopwood.
Welcome everyone to episode 40 of Finding True Wealth. Today we're going to be talking about contracts, small business, entrepreneurship, venture capital, and private equity with Richard Hoeg of Hoeg Law in Northville. Now, Rick is a huge Michigan fan and Star Wars fan as well, so I apologize in advance if we talk too much about Michigan or Star Wars. After listening today, I think that you'll see that Rick is a very good resource for anything business law related, anything contract related. Don't hesitate to follow Rick on Twitter at Hoeg Law. It's HOEGLAW, or the website hoeglaw.com. Without further ado, let's bring in Rick. Hey Rick, welcome to the show.
Hi Nick, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Today's actually my 7th meeting of the day, so
that's pretty good.
It's rare for a Friday. You know, it's usually Friday's more low-key. But I'm so glad to have Rick here. We got an exciting topic here with Rick Hoeg of Hoeg Law. Rick has a lovely wife Sharon and 2 beautiful daughters here in Northville, right?
I do.
You live in downtown, right?
No, I live right by the high school, so I get to deal with that traffic every day.
Yeah, that's nasty. But you could ride your bike downtown, right?
I could if I were so inclined, Nick.
Yeah. So keeping with our Finding True Wealth theme, Rick also attended the University of Michigan, right?
I did.
Okay.
Go Blue.
Yes, go Blue. And before we're done, I'll ask you for your prediction for this fall.
I'll try to come up with one by then.
Yeah, all right. Well, tell us about your, as an attorney, your educational background.
Sure. I went to high school at Detroit Catholic Central back when it was in Redford. So go Shamrocks. And then deciding not to leave the geography of the state, I moved out to Hillsdale County to go to Hillsdale College to study economics and mathematics from 98 to 2002. At which point I was accepted by the University of Michigan Law School and went to the greatest university on earth for 3 years.
Yes, sir.
And learned a lot about law. Graduated in 2005, and then loved Ann Arbor so much that I took a job at Miller Canfield in Ann Arbor in 2005. And then continued to love Ann Arbor so much that I helped open the Honigman office in Ann Arbor in 2007. Where I worked until 2016, eventually becoming a senior partner, which is called equity partners at Honigman, and then left in April of 2016 to start my own firm to really focus on small business, entrepreneurship, and helping out those kinds of clients. I continue a relationship with Honigman as what the lawyers call of counsel, which is a really fancy and nice term for contractor. But I've continued those relationships and regularly am down there still, but opened up an office in downtown Northville. You can see my name on the side of the building, which is no amount of joy for my 8-year-old who points it out when she passes on the bus. I think probably at this point to the chagrin of her friends.
That's great. That's funny.
That's
awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that sign's been on the side of the building for 2 years now.
2 years, yeah. We started in, I left Honeyman in April 2016, started Hoeg Law really in that location in October of 2016.
Okay, great. And I've been to your office, and you have a lovely Michigan football helmet
on
your bookcase, right?
I do. I have a signed Jim Harbaugh helmet with a Go Blue there.
Now, my helmet is Lloyd Carr, which is nice, right?
Sure,
but
Lloyd's good.
I think the Harbaugh one's a little more hot right now.
It was certainly hot a couple years ago. I mean, we'll have to see. It might be a different kind of hot depending on how 2018 goes.
Now, Rick, you're also a fellow MGO blog sponsor, right?
I am. Yeah, yes. Absolutely. Love those guys.
In fact, that's how we met.
Mm-hmm.
And after I realized that you were an MGO blog sponsor and we met, I started following you on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to say...
At Hoeg Law.
There you go. And how do you spell Hoeg?
H-O-E as in elephant, G as in George, L-A-W for the Twitter handle and the website.
There you go. And you have some really great tweets, I got to say. I mean, really, really witty.
I appreciate that. I think most of my witticisms are directed at snarky comments regarding OSU or MSU. So one of the big changes I made when I really started doing this in earnest 6 months ago was in the profile section of your Twitter handle, I put essentially comments directed at MSU and OSU are in good fun, because it is a professional, to the extent Twitter in any capacity is professional, it is a professional Twitter profile. So I was feeling a little bad about snarking on college students. So it is all in good fun, as rivalries are.
Yeah, but it's a great follow, and it also led me to the Hoeg Law blog.
Sure.
Which I understand got a lot of attention for your Star Wars article.
Oh yes, and that was how I made my first appearance on the MGO blog podcast, which was the very lightly titled Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker, and Heroism in the Age of Trump, which didn't get any,
so did you add
any clicks.
You added in the Trump just so people would
read
it.
No, actually what's funny about that is that article went a little bit viral and went to sites that I had really never heard of, such as Tumblr and Reddit, and so I've gotten to know those communities a little bit. But no, more than anything, it was accused of being clickbait. Than really getting the clicks, I think. But it's really very lightly political, and not at all insofar as it's about the current cultural media environment that results in the travesty that is Episode 8, The Last Jedi. In case anybody's curious about my thoughts on that film.
I did go see it in the theater, of course.
Sure.
But I did not see it in the theater 3 times like Episode 7.
Yeah, no, and I had that time essentially blocked out. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I had been ready to take my daughter, who I had watched the previous 6 movies with, that fall. And I left not really angry as much as kind of empty after that film. And then I was thinking about it enough over that weekend, and tweeting about it, of course, at Hoeg Law, that I decided that I was going to write down my thoughts on it. And truthfully, either as a good thing or as a bad thing, it has proven to be by far the most read thing that I've ever written.
Nice.
So, yeah, for your business, law, and Star Wars analysis needs.
So for the record, you liked Episode 7, right?
I think Episode 7 was fine. Okay. I'd put that as like a 6 or 7 in terms of, I don't think it did anything horribly wrong. It was a little evocative of A New Hope in a way that I thought was a little bit not original. Yeah. But I think that The Last Jedi is just really bad.
Well, I did watch The Last Jedi again, on iTunes, and
sure.
It wasn't so bad. Okay, so what do you spend most of your time doing at Hoeg Law?
Sure. So Hoeg Law is a business law firm. So the first thing I would say is that the practice of law is really divided into 2 halves, which are the law and order type folks that you think of when you think a lawyer, the people that are yelling objection in courtrooms and saying sustained and that kind of thing, and the transactional side of things, which are the folks that are doing corporate transactions, funding, financing, organization, on the personal side, trust and estates, and those kinds of things. And so Hoeg Law is a business law firm. We focus on helping companies get formed, organized, financed, operate, and hopefully exit. I've had a lot of good trips to the bar or trips to the restaurant after having people make their millions from exits from companies that I helped start within my career.
That's got to be really rewarding.
It's not as rewarding for me as it is for them, I don't think, but they always buy me dinner those nights, so that's right. Always nice. But no, it is really good to see these scientists come out of the University of Michigan with an idea, maybe not the best notion of how to commercialize it, be an integral part of helping them figure out how to organize, how to sell themselves, how to get those vendor contracts, how to get that money in the door. And then, when the biopharmaceutical company comes rolling in and offers them $50 million, it's a good day.
But even for small companies like me, right?
Sure.
So, we're a firm of 3. We have an intern who's starting on Monday.
I love it.
A Michigan economics undergrad.
Comply with those labor laws.
That's right.
And give me a call.
So we're a small firm. We're an LLC. Right?
Yeah.
So you can help people set up an LLC or
Absolutely.
an S corp. How do you know what you should do if it's should I do an LLC or an S corp or a C corp? How do I know what to do?
Sure. Well, as you may or may not know, LLCs are becoming more and more popular and really overtaking corporations as the preferred form right now. But I think lawyers give this answer a lot, but it's really a matter of talking with the potential client and seeing what it is about their plans, their goals, that makes one more attractive than the other. So corporations are really good for, we know exactly how these things work. They're older than dirt in terms of the history of the Republic. So people know how boards work. They know how officers work. They know what fiduciary duties are. They know what a corporation looks like. And that's something that is very easy to put together, but is potentially more expensive because you have an annual meeting requirement. You have these things that you have to hit with specificity. Versus the LLC form, which is, in the scope of things, relatively young. It was really only invented in the 90s, and is still in this kind of quasi-real place where the IRS doesn't acknowledge that they exist.
So it's a pass-through.
It's a full pass-through, and it's a check the box. So you create an LLC, and the IRS says, okay, that's a partnership.
Right.
And then you say, no, I want this LLC to be a corporation. And the IRS says, fine, whatever.
Yeah, because we are an LLC.
Sure.
But actually file as an S Corp now, based on our CPA's advice.
Sure, so if you look at that tax situation, you've actually filed a couple things. So you filed an LLC to form. Then you filed a box that says you're going to be a corporation. Then you say, yeah, we're going to be a corporation, but we're going to be a pass-through corporation. So you're actually 3 levels removed from what you initially formed. And that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. And one of the main ones that you'd probably structured for that reason is to get you out of some of the self-employment tax situation, which you would otherwise kind of undertake with the money coming straight through. That's all treated as essentially salary.
Yeah.
And you can split that up in a reasonable way by having an S-Corp status. So I don't know what your specific situation is, but those are conversations that are always advisable to have with your counsel and with your accountant. I mean, one of the pieces of advice I always
So
give
you
to
work
people,
closely with the accountant?
I do.
Okay.
I do. One of the if someone comes in and has a dream, even if it's crazy, I say, hey, talk to a lawyer that is a good fit for you from a personality perspective, because that's really the most important thing, is to have a good rapport and a good, I jokingly say in some of my talks on this that lawyer is a very intimate relationship. This is a doctor type thing. You need to be able to talk to your lawyer about the mole on your back that you don't know what it is, and about the things that are wrong with your body.
Yeah.
And so you have to have a good feel for them. You have to feel like they're a good friend, or they're a good acquaintance, or that you're willing to say these secrets to them, or else it's not going to work. And it's the same really with your accountant.
At the risk of getting a snarky comment, right?
Well, I try not to give snarky comments with my clients unless it's something that's a rapport that works for us.
There you go.
But yeah, there's different lawyers. There's lawyers that'll be staid and wear suits and white shoes all the time. And Nick, you're seeing me and not just my voice, so you know that's never going to be me. I'm never going to have that kind of presence. But I feel like I can have, at Hoeg Law especially, a kind of more intimate, directed, personal relationship with the clients that I have. Sometimes you want to hire Honigman and Miller Canfield. Sometimes you want to hire Hoeg Law, and it's no skin off my nose if one or the other is your preference. But I think that you need to have a good match for the lawyer that you're hiring.
So if someone comes to you and they say, I want to open a business, or I'm a sole proprietor and I need to make it official.
Yep.
You help them. You counsel as maybe the structure, you consult with the CPA, then you make a joint decision or a recommendation.
Yeah, well, usually it doesn't need to be that complicated at the outset, because there aren't that many triggers to hit or flips to switch right at the outset. But you do want to have a talk with your lawyer, you do want to have a talk with your accountant to make sure you're not missing anything in terms of your income. But then, in general, we have a 20-minute conversation. We talk about what your management structure is going to look like, why an LLC works, why a corporation works, and then we get you started up. And then, generally speaking, you'd have that conversation with me. I'd draft up a set of documents. Hopefully, you've hired an accountant by that point in time. We'd send the set of documents to you and the accountant. The accountant would have some comments, some of which would make sense, some of which wouldn't, but we'd have that conversation with them. And then we'd get you filed, we'd get a minute book created, and then you'd be good to go.
Okay, so that seems pretty easy logistically. What about strategy-wise?
Strategy-wise, in terms of what you want to put together. So, I mean, I think that's part of the value that a good lawyer can provide, is to sit down with you, talk to you about, what do you want this company to look like in 3 years? Are you going to use institutional financing? Are you going to use venture capital? Because that's going to change whether or not it makes sense to be a Michigan LLC or a Michigan corporation or a Delaware corporation, because different financing sources expect your entity to look differently and are more likely to invest if it looks one way rather than the other. and have those conversations with somebody who's done it for more than a decade and can have some experience with what you're going through and say, okay, you're going to have a 2-person board and a 50-50 stock membership. You have to think about whether or not there's a good way to break ties.
Yeah, what do you do if it's 50-50?
Yeah, you need to have that conversation. And ideally, a lot of clients will say, oh no, we're in love, or we've been partners for 15 years, it's all going to be fine, and not deal with it. But to have the conversation now, when everybody's a dreamer and everybody's looking at the future with golden sunglasses on, rather than 2 years down the line when everything's going wrong and having that fight.
It's hard to break up partnerships, right?
It is very hard to break up partnerships, and it's even harder when, if you've got a 50-50 scenario, what we would call deadlock can happen, which is the company, whether it's an LLC or a corporation, can't do anything, can't do what it should do, can't stop doing what it shouldn't do. And really the only way to fix that is the statutes allow for the court to come in and start ordering things or liquidating the assets of the enterprise. And that's the apocalypse scenario. That's the worst case.
That sounds horrible.
So then that's the kind of conversation I can have with someone sitting in my office saying, all right, 50-50 is fine, but maybe you should decide on somebody getting an extra vote if it really gets deadlocked.
Okay. Makes sense. We like to watch Shark Tank every now and again.
Sure.
Okay. So every once in a while, there's some people that come on, and after 5 or 10 minutes of them trying to pitch their company, one of the sharks keep asking questions, and then they find out they only own 20% of the company.
Sure.
They've given away more than half.
Sure.
And it seems like if they had someone like you in their corner, they would be making better decisions.
Well, I can't say sitting here that selling 80% of the company was a bad decision, because there are scenarios in which company's going under, it's going to be worth 0 if you don't sell, and maybe you get 20% of something later on. But a lot of the times 20/80 is probably not what you want to do.
Yeah.
I think, generally speaking, what I tell people is, if you're going to sign your name to any kind of contract, if you're going to sign your company's name to any kind of contract, you really should think about having counsel review it. And that goes especially for selling equity.
Especially. Yeah.
But I've gotten into situations where a client has entered into something small, like a waste management agreement. This is a company that picks up their garbage.
Yeah.
And they're gonna move spaces. The lease didn't work out. They're gonna change locations. And they come to me and say, the waste management company is asking for $8,000. And you say, well, all right, show me the contract. And they didn't show it to you in advance because it's a form contract. It's the waste people. And you look and you see that the termination section says that if they terminate within the lifetime of the contract, they have to pay what would have been owed until the end of the contract, which they agreed was for 10 years, because that's what the client signed. And that'll be multiplied by 3 times, because that's the penalty for breaking the contract early. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, I think it's $8,000. We can fight it, or that you can say, come after us, but the contract that you sign yields that result. And yes, God willing, if you had shown that to me earlier, I would have flagged that as, you need to at least be aware of the very bad things that happen if you try to terminate this early. And that's what a counsel can do for you, is they can look through something for an hour or 2 hours and say, even if we can't negotiate this, you say, Rick, this is with Microsoft, this is with GM, this is with somebody huge. They're not going to let us negotiate this. There is still value in knowing exactly how much of your soul or which firstborn that you sold when you signed up to this contract. And that's a value that counsel can provide. And I know a number of clients have come back to me and said that they really appreciate and feel good about the fact that, yes, they had to spend a little bit of money on legal counsel, but they knew that here were the exposure risks and were able to strategize around their future contracts or their continued negotiations with this entity based on what they found out from what they read in their standard vendor contract. And if you can take anything away from it, is if somebody offers you a contract, chances are, in any case where it can be slanted one way or the other, it's slanted towards them.
Understood. That's a crazy story with that.
It's the truth. Company. 100% true.
So you spend much of your time in business law like this, as you're describing, but you also have a really strong background in venture capital and private equity, which you're still involved with. Can you tell me, well, maybe for our listeners, explain the difference? And
Sure. Well, venture capital is the sexy term. That's what people like to talk about with Silicon Valley and Boston. When I left the University of Michigan Law School, I was hired at Miller Canfield to join their venture capital practice group, which was in Ann Arbor, and had a number of clients that focused on primarily life sciences, medical devices, that kind of thing, in and around Ann Arbor. As I think your listeners probably know, the University of Michigan is one of the best research institutes in the world and has a lot of interesting technology that they're patenting constantly, and has a wonderful Office of Technology Transfer that helps their people commercialize these things. And academics are academics, but a lot of them have an entrepreneurial spirit and want to try to make a company out of this thing. And so I did a lot of help helping the venture capitalists in Ann Arbor and Lansing, and there's some on the west side, Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, and Detroit, work with especially the university and the Ann Arbor office of Miller Canfield, and then Honigman, figuring out what were good assets and helping to document what we would call Series A rounds usually, which is the first round of institutional financing that a company gets that has what you would consider venture capital terms. A seat on the board, what we would call protective provisions, which are that the venture capitalists get to be involved in certain of the votes of the things that the company does, and a whole mess of other terms and terminology that go along with venture capital investment. If your listeners are interested, that same Hoeg Law blog that has an article on Star Wars and Luke Skywalker has a fairly detailed 15-part series, which is a deep dive on the National Venture Capital Association's standard term sheet, which I essentially use as a jumping off point to really discuss what is a right of first refusal, what is a right of co-sale, what are protective provisions, what is a standard board allocation, and to really dive deep and to look at those kinds of things. And I've gotten some good responses on those. It's a little too detailed to go into in this podcast format, but it's a lot of fun. I like to tell people, a lot of folks are scared about venture capital for exactly the reason that you kind of highlighted earlier in this interview, which is that they're afraid that they accidentally sell the whole thing, or that the venture capitalists do something that is tricky and takes away something that they weren't expecting. If you've seen The Social Network, that scene where it turns out that Zuckerberg has completely diluted his partner and he doesn't have anything anymore.
Yeah, I remember that scene. It was like...
Yeah, and I've used
crazy.
that in my talks, which is, that's what people are afraid of. And there's a lot of bad things you can do with loopholes, and there's a lot of bad things you can do regardless of what the contract says. But it doesn't mean that you should necessarily not take an action that could be enormously helpful and valuable to your enterprise. There are a lot of venture capitalists and a lot of private equity firms that are very helpful to getting a company off the ground or helping it expand or whatever else it is that you're facing with when you're looking at those financing sources. So just like any other professional that you hire, whether it's lawyer, accountant, doctor, financial advisor is something you might be familiar with.
Yes, sir.
You need to have an understanding of who they are, what they're about, have a certain amount of trust with them. Because one of the things I tell clients is, my job is to write things in contracts, is to put these provisions that help detail how people are to behave. But they are only as good as how far you're willing to go to enforce them. And a lot of the times it doesn't make sense to go through the judicial system to try to enforce what's the words on the page say a different party should do. So you have to have a certain amount of trust. You have to have this intimate and well-received relationship with your financial partners, with your vendors, with everybody else that you interact with. And that's as important as having a good lawyer to tell you, no, don't sign that. Is to have that trust that somebody can't take this sentence that was well crafted and figure out a way to read it in a completely different language to really take it to you.
Now, we're in Michigan.
We are.
We think about, Silicon Valley, and you mentioned Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently Boston has a lot of VC. I don't know.
Yes, it does. Boston is Boston and Silicon Valley.
But what about Michigan? Like, how are you in Michigan?
Yeah, so what I would say is that Michigan is surprisingly robust in its venture capital environment.
Is it all Ann Arbor, like you were saying, the university?
So Ann Arbor is very well represented.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of good, what we would call accelerators or incubators that are operating in Detroit and Grand Rapids and in Lansing. Those are the areas in which I am most familiar with. If there's stuff more north than that, I don't know it. But there are a lot of good sources of financing. There's a lot of good sources of venture capital as well as private equity, both in financial organizations that focus specifically on taking money and trying to make more by investing, as well as in strategics, which are essentially big buckets of money that large corporations have, of which Michigan has more than a few, that seek to invest in things that aren't just the market, that aren't just banknotes, things of that nature, and to really have a certain amount of their investment be put forth as risk capital. Venture capital is sexy because if you succeed, you can make billions. But because of that, the reason that you can do that is because you can get really good terms, because the companies that you're investing in at a venture level they don't exist. They don't have revenue. They haven't done anything yet.
Yeah.
You have to risk that much money because 9 times out of 10 it's going to fail.
They never made a sale.
Yeah. These companies you're talking about a pharmaceutical company that maybe isn't through the first phase of FDA approval. And you look at it and you say, all right, we think we've got a good feeling that if this makes it all the way through, you're talking about billions. But as you probably know, a whole lot of pharmaceuticals are dropped as halfway through because they don't work or they have side effects that aren't acceptable or they kill people. And you can't put that on the market. And so I use that as an example, but that goes for anything. A mechanical invention can have those same kinds of things where you realize halfway through, it gets too hot and it melts everything, and we haven't developed a metal that can do what it is it's supposed to do. And so there's a risk before you have a product, before you have a revenue stream, before you have a client base. And Michigan is a lot better represented than I think most think.
Yeah.
And there is a resource that I really like on this called the Michigan Venture Capital Association, the MVCA, that makes a yearly report on the state of venture capital in Michigan. And I recommend to all your listeners to check it out because it is interesting how much money is in Michigan and certainly in the Midwest in general in these fields.
Have you seen a trend from your viewpoint over the last 10 years?
So 2008, 2009 was a blip, but it was certainly growing when I started my career. And then VC, I think like most financial transactions of any kind, really had kind of a swan song for a couple of years there. And it appears to have come back and been pretty strong. I still get to do quite a few deals in and around Michigan for a number of venture capital funds. And portfolio companies, which is the term that is given by VC funds for who they invest in.
So that makes me think of Google and their autonomous driving vehicles and all these other things.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently on Google's earnings reports, they list this like black box as losing billions of dollars every quarter, but they're so profitable with the core business.
Sure, alternative investments.
Everyone forgives them.
Yeah, well, you make the bets, right? You bet that was billions on the premise that maybe you can make hundreds of billions, and everybody understands what you're doing. For a company like Google, there's also strategic venture capital investment, which is maybe this thing hasn't proven itself yet, but if I get in on the ground floor and as a condition for my investment, I mandate that there's an exclusive commercial license for whatever this thing is whenever it happens, then if I make enough of those bets, then maybe I have the market cornered on the coolest thing ever 10 years from now. And so a lot of companies with a lot of money make those bets.
Interesting. So that's a lot of detail on venture capital, but you also have played in the private equity area as well.
Yeah, so in terms of the differences between venture capital and private equity, the primary difference is the stage of life in which they're investing in a company. So venture capital is adventure, as you could think of. It's nothing has happened yet, and we're investing at that point in time. Private equity is a more mature organization. It has revenues. It's been around for a little while, and the reason it needs a major capital infusion is either because the model has suddenly stopped working, or the market has shifted in such a direction that it makes sense for this company to expand. That this market now is maybe only going to support 6 major companies or something along those lines, and you need a massive capital infusion because you want to be one of those 6, and everybody else is going down. And that tends to be the kind of scenarios that you see. Private equity does a couple of other things, but it's really more mature companies and helping them expand or be rescued if things are really going wrongly in how they're being managed or what they're doing. And so, it's a similar kind of concept. It's essentially organizations and enterprises that are focused on alternative investments that maybe banks won't handle directly. But it's a different kind of thing because it's later in the life of the entity, and those private equity firms have to be compensated a little bit differently because they're not making a bet that can be a 20 times multiplier. It's going to be shorter, so they need to have terms that make more sense for whatever services they're going to provide as part of investing in the company.
So we do allocate to private equity for appropriate people at the appropriate time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the big players that are out there not endorsing anyone are like KKR and Carlyle and...
Sure, Barbarians at the Gate, great HBO movie.
Right, there you go. So it's a different... retail investors can invest in private equity through companies like that now. It's not just for people that, it's not just institutions or the super rich anymore.
No, although you probably still have to be accredited in almost all these instances.
Yeah, at least $1 million net worth for sure, at the very minimum. So we see that as an investment opportunity. But it's not the Gordon Gekko Wall Street movie anymore, right? It
can be. I mean, if you want to act like that, you're more than welcome to.
But some people, that's all they can't get past it.
Sure,
they think of Gordon Gekko, and they think he's buying the airline company and then firing everyone. Everyone loses their job just so he can make money.
Yep.
That's really not the most common situation, is it?
I don't know whether it's the most common situation. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certainly private equity firms and other kind of institutional finance sources that specialize in, I describe it as rescue because that's the nicest, most genteel way of thinking about it. Sometimes you can do that. The company is rescued and everything works great. Rescue very often is you buy the assets, they can be used better, but not in this form. Mm-hmm. And so that does wind up taking the view of, yes, everybody's fired and everything goes away. But no, ideally, Wall Street as a film is designed to give you this kind of morality play of what's happening with respect to Mr. Gekko and the airlines. That's a good movie. I'm gonna go watch that now. But it's not ever so simple. The financing sources want to make money, and if they can make money by keeping the format the same and sloughing off some extra liabilities or doing something that makes sense for the company without doing that, nobody really wants that negative PR. But sometimes the assets of an entity are so wasted with respect to the liabilities that they have that it doesn't make sense to proceed in that format. One of the really not shocking exactly, but disappointing stories of 2018 so far is what has happened with Toys R Us, and that there's a number of reasons why that disappoints me, but one of them is because what happened there is that they had over-leveraged their real estate assets in such a fashion that there was no real good way to get out of it without liquidating the company. And they tried. The bankruptcy courts tried to do something that would work better for a surviving entity. And undoubtedly, the name will be sold. My wife asked me about this the other day. I said, no, there will be a Toys R Us because that's a valuable brand. But it might be like a column on Amazon.com that you click on.
It
could be a column on Amazon.com. It could be a series of pop-up stores that only appear in Times Square. But that name, Jeffrey the Giraffe, Toys R Us, IP doesn't go away that if it has goodwill.
Jeffrey with a G.
Jeffrey with a G. And Toys R Us has that goodwill. But you look at those kinds of situations, and those are, I would characterize, and I wasn't a part of this deal, and so you have to take all these things with a grain of salt. Everything on here is obviously not legal advice, and it's for informational purposes only.
Full disclosure.
But looking at it from afar, that does seem to be the kind of scenario where, okay, it looks like some finance sources went and they got their pound of flesh, they leveraged the assets of the company, and they took their money and ran. And that's not a great look, and it makes people reticent of having these kinds of conversations with finance sources, and that disappoints me as well.
It also gives another black eye to Dave Brandon, our friend.
Well, that's okay with me. That's not a disappointment to me, other than the fact that, I think he speaking of pounds of flesh, I'm fairly certain he did all right with his salary the last couple of years.
Yeah, he was probably getting paid by both, right?
He was probably, that's absolutely true. He probably was getting paid by both, and, multi-millions of dollars for not really changing the course of history. I mean, anybody could have sat in that seat and gotten Toys R Us to the same liquidation that they got to here.
It very well may have been doomed.
Yeah, it was doomed, and I don't blame Dave Brandon for where Toys R Us arrived at. But it's one of those situations where it gives a black eye to everything. And I a couple years back I did a lot of Kickstarters. You do any Kickstarters? You support anything on Kickstarter or Indiegogo?
Kind of like, those are companies raising money?
Kickstarters are they can be people, but they're essentially crowdfunded sources of donative intent for the most part. You put in $50, and if enough people put in $50, hopefully a board game or a video game or an album will be.
And you get the product.
Ideally,
like the first person.
If one ever pops out. Yeah, so the reason I was bringing it up at all is I supported a number of Kickstarters back in, I don't know what it would be, 2009 probably. And enough of them failed. Enough of the people that were putting these projects on were clearly either in over their heads in managing the logistics of a project like this, or thieves, that it poisoned the well. Kickstarter has never kind of recovered to making that much money, to supporting that many projects as it did when all that was happening, because you look at it and say, well, I can't trust anything's going to pop out of there. And then, of course, from a commercial lawyer's contract perspective, Kickstarter changed its terms so that the producers don't have to actually produce what they're promising to produce anymore. And then the contract guy in me says, nah, I'm not. Yeah, I see what you did there.
Yep. Okay. Well, private equity has always been an interesting area for me, and so it's fun for me to talk with you because I've never had any inside view. It's always on the outside.
There's a lot of good people in private equity. There's a lot of bad people in private equity. There's a lot of,
that goes for any business.
Yeah, if you have any takeaway at all, it's that go ascertain who you're working with at anything, whether it's your waste company, whether it's your private equity guy. There's good and bad people everywhere. So don't let the fact that there are bad people prohibit you from doing something that makes the most sense for your company, because there's a lot of good ones out there too.
That makes sense. Well, we've come to the time now of the prediction. So
okay.
I hope you've been thinking about that.
Yeah, you know, I was enjoying the conversation so much, and I was reflecting on my thoughts on Luke Skywalker that I just I put it aside. No, so obviously the Shea Patterson news is pretty big for these last 2 weeks, and I think, I don't know whether you assume, I assume that he will be the starting quarterback at the University of Michigan.
I expect that's the case.
So I think that's probably worth a win or two. I look at the schedule this year and I say, it's tough. Yeah. That's a tough schedule.
We open up at Notre Dame.
Yeah, well, we're going to take Notre Dame behind the woodshed. That I'm not worried about.
Right.
So, no, the truth is Notre Dame's always a close game regardless of the talents of the teams, and also because
it's the first game.
Things aren't perfect that first week, so there'll be some mistakes made. No, I think we'll beat Notre Dame. I think we're going to get upended in some random game like Northwestern.
Like at Iowa in 2015.
Yeah, so I'm going to have us at 10-2.
Okay, so is that...
I have to go further?
Hold on. Well, wait. Is that like upended in Northwestern and Columbus?
Gee whiz. I think we're going to lose to Northwestern, and I think we're going to lose to Ohio State.
I hate to hear it. I hate the thought.
It's funny. I think that Ohio State has us right now in the situation that I remember growing up in with respect to Michigan State, which was that Michigan State, for a period of time, always played the Wolverines so close. Like, they seemingly could have won every game for like a 10-year stretch and always lost by 4 or 6 or something like that. And I always had a great deal of comfort with, oh, well, they're gonna threaten me. I'm going to heart palpitate, but we're going to win.
And that's where the little brother comment comes in.
Yeah, and it's in that history that all develops. And I feel like Ohio State, I feel like, that fourth down stop from 2016 is like every single game for the last little while, with the exception, we got blown out the one time. But it's like we really are closer to Ohio State for the last little while than we probably should have been on talent, and then just always this much short. I find that visual representations on podcasts are very effective.
It's a very visual podcast.
Yes, very visual. So I'm holding my fingers very close together for effect. But no, that we're always this much short. It wouldn't surprise me if we won. It really wouldn't, because I think we're well positioned. But it's a tough year. It'll be a learning year. And, if our offensive line actually can gel for the first time in my recollection, I think they could be 12-0. But I feel 10-2.
Speaking to your point about growing up, so I grew up in East Lansing as a Michigan State fan. I stepped into Ann Arbor in '97, so I hated Michigan. Okay?
Sure, of course.
I hated Michigan because I felt like the little brother. I understand. Okay?
Michigan has a well-deserved reputation for arrogance.
Yes. So, but stepping into Ann Arbor in '97, no problem singing Hails of the Victors right away.
It was a good year.
Absolutely.
It was all right.
It's been downhill since then.
Well, see, that's funny with your history. So I have a bit of an anti-authoritarian streak in me. I always have. And in my formative years, I lived in East Lansing. and we were down the street from, is it Spartan Stadium?
Yeah.
Is that what it goes by? So we could hear the band from my porch for like fourth and fifth grade. And I remember having green and white days at school and everything else. And because of the type of person that I was, that is when I decided to be a Wolverine. And so
Defiant.
Yeah, so green and white, it just really bugged me. It's like, no, we can't all be on the same side of this kind of thing. And so that's really when I became a big Michigan fan. And then thankfully, I'm very thankful that I got to attend there.
Yeah. So back to the Ohio State part, though.
Yes.
Growing up, right, when Michigan won, it was like 12-1-1 against Cooper or whatever it was.
Yeah, good times.
I participated only like three of those.
Oh.
Okay. So then it's all downhill against Michigan State and Ohio State.
It's been a tough 15 years.
Dang, man. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going with 10-2. I like it.
I'm going 10-2.
I think that's pretty good. I think it's probably spot on. I'd like to think that we can be better because we fixed the quarterback problem. And like with offensive line, right, we had a strong running game at the end of the year.
God help us. Offensive line.
We had a strong run game last year towards the end.
Sure.
Right, so I'm optimistic there. I like the receivers. Defense, they were excellent.
I love our defense. I love our defense.
I love them. And they were excellent except for against a sudden change last year, but they were so young.
Yeah.
When O'Korn came in at Wisconsin, you could see the air went out.
There was no chance after
and
that
against
happened.
Ohio State, once Ohio State took that lead, it was over.
John O'Korn's interception right in the fourth quarter with 2 minutes left was also played a role.
Well, yeah, they laid down. They laid down after that.
Yes,
but
I would have laid down too. I'd like to think of myself better than that.
Yeah.
But he throws that interception. I think I did lay down in my living room. So
yeah, it was tough. But I think that we fixed the one position problem.
It was a significant problem.
Yeah.
No, I think one of my tweets was, I think I was discussing, I can't remember who I was discussing it with, but it was discussing the quarterback situation. I said, well, I think anything north of a tire fire for Michigan State and Ohio State last year, and we win those games, that game plan for Ohio State was fantastic.
It was.
Those people were running so wide open for 60 minutes.
And O'Korn was hitting them in the first half.
They were catching them in the first half. I think it's generous to say he was hitting them.
All right.
It was a trying game. But
Yeah.
no, I think 10-2, I think we could do better than that. I don't really think we could do much worse. I don't see it as that kind of scenario. I think that's me being a little pessimistic because I've been hurt a lot very recently, Nick.
I have to. I can relate, man. Well, hey, Rick, I appreciate you coming on. A wealth of information. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I'd like to thank Rick for joining us today. Don't hesitate to reach out to Rick with your Star Wars or Michigan football or, of course, contract questions. And if you have a small business and you have that entrepreneurial spirit with a portfolio of over $500,000, please apply for an appointment at peakwm.com, or you can reach out to me directly, nick@peakwm.com. And finally, the best way to listen is on the Podbean app. If you have not downloaded the Podbean app, please do so today and subscribe to Finding True Wealth.
You've been listening to the Peak Financial Minute with Nick Hopwood. You can subscribe to this podcast through iTunes and the Android Marketplace or by visiting www.peakwm.com. Peak Wealth Management is your premier wealth management partner. Plan, protect, peak. Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Peak Wealth Management, LLC, a state of Michigan registered investment advisor. Peak Wealth Management, LLC is independent of Regulus Advisors.